This past week, Turkish authorities raided and seized control of the country's largest daily newspaper, Zaman, its sister publication, Today's Zaman, and the Cihan news agency. 3 body blows to the Fourth Estate in Turkey. Journalists thrown out of their jobs said that overnight Zaman was turned into a government mouthpiece. The paper is allied with a Turkish religious leader living in the U.S., Fethullah Gulen, who's a former ally of President Tayyip Erdogan. Other media organizations with links to the Gulen movement have been raided and taken over in the past year, but there's more to the media story in Turkey right now than a settling of scores between Erdogan and Gulen. Last year, the government accused 2 editors from the Cumhuriyet newspaper of treason for publishing information about weapons transfers by the Turkish Secret Service to rebel fighters in Syria. Then, when Turkey's highest court ordered their release from prison, President Erdogan announced that he would not respect the ruling, effectively setting the stage for a showdown between the government, the courts, and the media. As for outside pressure on President Erdogan, his critics say there's simply not enough of it. And they blame that on the wider refugee story. The European Union needs Turkey these days, they say, to help limit the flow of refugees into the EU. So European leaders are going easy on the president. Later in this broadcast, a feature interview with Can Dündar, the Cumhuriyet editor whose fate, depending on who you believe, rests either with the courts or the president. But first, the wider media story in Turkey, including some of the voices the government's just silenced. Our starting point this week is Istanbul. The front page of Zaman, Turkey's biggest selling paper, on Saturday, March 5th, was dressed in black. The headline says the Constitution is suspended. The next day's paper had a much brighter outlook, featuring a smiling president talking about the historical excitement around a new bridge project. What happened? This.
The government has seized control of the country's biggest newspaper.
Riot police pushed through the crowd with water cannon and tear gas.
The paper is under new management after what might be described as a hostile takeover.
The brutal crackdown was almost expected. It was a matter of time because for the last 2.5 years, the government has been targeting our media group by means of smear campaigns. Pro-government columnists, actually I call them the hitmen of the government, have been encouraging the AKP to target Zaman Media Group.
This is the final stage to change the media structure, ownership structure in Turkey. This is sad, this is tragic in a way. This is a step to change the editorial line altogether, which it did actually, because if we see 2 coverages of the Zaman newspaper, one day before the takeover and the next day, of course there's a huge difference.
I mean, I can't even find the right word. It's somehow funny. I mean, how would a Zaman reader react to the drastic change of the political line of the newspaper? Nobody takes it serious. Not even people who are supporting Erdogan would take it serious. You change the management of the newspaper and you change the newspaper's policy and oops, everything will be changed. No, you cannot stop opposition. No way.
The takeovers at Zaman, Zaman Today, and the Cihan news agency represent one front in the media war being waged in Turkey between the government and Gulenists. Fethullah Gulen, the Islamic cleric living in the U.S., was a key supporter of Tayyip Erdogan until they fell out 3 years ago. The news outlets affiliated with Gulen and what Turks call the Hizmet movement supported Erdogan too, and the government left them alone. But the fallout happened and the coverage changed, particularly in 2013, when the Gulenist media broke stories alleging corruption in Erdogan's family. Then the Gulen group of outlets suddenly found themselves accused of financial irregularities. Can Dündar is a columnist at Sabah and a member of the ruling AK party.
I don't think that last Friday was one of the darkest days in Turkish press history. Zaman Group, which owns Zaman paper, was taken under trusteeship because there were questions about its financial dealings. It has not been taken over. If the courts rule that there is no financial misdoings, it will be given back to the owners. But we have to remember that this is a movement that has been investigated for financial misdoings in America and other countries as well. So it's not actually surprising that it's happened in Turkey.
Everything that is going on in Turkey, all lawlessness, violations of human rights, violation of media freedoms, they all boil down to the corruption investigation of 2013. Because the corruption investigations allegedly implicated Erdogan's family, in order to distract attention from those corruption investigations, he needed a scapegoat. And that scapegoat turned out to be the Hizmet movement. And unfortunately, a significant portion of the Turkish people bought this argument.
According to the New York-based Committee to Protect Journalists, only 3 countries, China, Egypt, and Iran, have more media workers in prison than Turkey does. The Turkish Journalists Union reports that 33 are currently behind bars. The majority of them are Kurds, reporting in the southeast. Censorship and blocking of Kurdish news platforms has become routine. Since the fighting flared up in Kurdistan last year, DIHA, the largest Kurdish news agency, has had its site blocked 29 times. Another news agency, Firat, and the biggest-selling Kurdish paper, Özgür Gündem, also had their websites closed when the fighting began. They can be seen from outside Turkey, but not from within the country. Then there's the case of IMC TV, a channel based in Istanbul that focuses on Kurdish issues. On March 4th, on the orders of prosecutors in Ankara, Turksat, the state-owned satellite company, dropped IMC, relegating it to terrestrial and online access only. And the plug was pulled on the channel during an interview with 2 newspaper editors from Cumhuriyet who are clearly unpopular with President Erdogan. Banu Gulen was conducting the interview just before the channel went to black.
It was like 3 p.m. where I had Can Dündar and Erdem Gül on air, and probably someone called Turksat and asked them why our channel was still on air.
Yayınımız şu anda kesilmiş, evet. Arkadaşlarım kulağıma şu anda bu bilgiyi veriyorlar.
And it may have taken maybe 15 minutes or 20 minutes until they dropped us from the satellite.
Nedeninin ne olduğunu şu an bilmiyoruz. Ama tahmin edebiliyoruz.
I strongly believe that the timing was in relation with this live interview I was conducting with Can Dündar and Erdem Gül.
When that interview took place, Can Dündar, the editor of Cumhuriyet, and Erdem Gül, the paper's Ankara bureau chief, were fresh out of jail. The charges were espionage and terror-related and came after President Erdogan promised to make them pay for their journalism.
Bu haberi özel haber olarak yapan kişi de öyle zannediyorum ki bunun bedelini ağır ödeyecek.
When the Constitutional Court freed the 2 men last month, the president said he would not abide by the court's decision. The matter is now in the hands of a lower court, and in Tayyip Erdogan's Turkey, who knows what happens next.
He spoke as an individual. As far as I know, I'm not a lawyer, but the objection that was made by some people is that the lower courts should have arrived at a decision first, and then an appeal would have been made to the Constitutional Court. The Constitutional Court, by making a ruling, has made any decision the lower courts make a moot point.
So let's focus on Erdogan's statement, because he's openly leading the courts, which is unconstitutional, because according to the Turkish constitution, nobody, let alone a president, could give court instructions. And in this case, clearly Erdogan has been interfering with the court's decision and has been saying that he doesn't recognize the court's decision. This is another alarming signal that the constitution has been violated in Turkey.
One final note. Brussels hosted a news event this past week involving European heads of government. The EU has been among President Erdogan's toughest critics on freedom of the press, but that's not what the meeting was about. It was on how to limit the flow of Syrian refugees coming through Turkey into Europe. Turkey, represented by Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu, held most of the cards, and everyone at the meeting knew it. It ended with the EU cutting Turkey a check for 3 billion euros, along with promises to make it easier for Turks to get visas to enter the EU. All that talk we used to hear from Brussels on Turkey's lamentable record on media freedom, how it fails to measure up to the values Europeans are said to cherish, didn't make it onto the official agenda. And the Turkish news media what's left of them. We're all over the story. On the download now, our reviewers weigh in on the political and legal battle over the media in Turkey.
Turkish decision makers, military, government, other bodies of decision making, they unanimously agree that Fethullah Gulen movement and PKK are dangerous threats to Turkish unity and they must be dealt with. The government is building solid cases against their members, including their journalists. The same crackdown process actually is going on against the PKK terrorist organization, against its media like the IMC TV that openly does PKK propaganda.
More than the raid on the newspaper Zaman and the takeover, more shocking than that was the decision of the EU to really turn a blind eye on Turkey's deteriorating press freedom record and basically letting President Erdogan and his government continue doing whatever it wants within the country.